Good afternoon and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the panel on real-time video in the COVID-19 era. I am the moderator, Alex Eleftheriadis. I'm with Fence House and Big Pie. And I'm joined today by a very distinguished group of colleagues. We have Bernard Aboba from Microsoft. We have Thomas Davis from Cisco. We have Michael Horowitz from Google, San Liu from Tencent, and Lital Masiak from Facebook. And in this panel, what we set out to do is explore the role and challenges of real-time video in the COVID-19 and post-pandemic era. We have the full hour. We want to make this a very interactive session, so feel free to send in questions while the discussion is going on. By way of introduction, I've been in video communication since 1990. That's when I started my PhD, and I do realize it's a very long time. But it's also a very big part, I guess, of video communications history. And what happened is, at the end of last year, I just realized how lucky we are that COVID actually happened in the era we are in right now. If this thing had happened 10 years ago, the situation would have been very, 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 very different. And in fact, I wrote an article on LinkedIn just to explain, I guess, how I personally saw the evolution of technology in this space, because I believe a lot of the people even people who are in the field, just don't know the history of the whole of this whole space. So again, I think it's a very unique time, but I think in my title on my article is why the battle was won, because I do feel that the video basically saved the day throughout this period. Okay, so what I would like to do is maybe start by discussing why we were more or less ready for COVID-19. What were the elements of our readiness? And maybe Michael, you want to start with your understanding.
I would be very happy to do that. Now, I think the short answer, and as you alluded to, and what your article, if I recall, when I read it a few months ago, covers, is that technology improvements in several areas. That's the key, several areas. And if you'll bear with me, I'd like to highlight just a few important areas, many of which I think will become recurring themes in this discussion today. So let's start with, or I'll start with network technology. So a decade ago, I leased 3 T1 lines, 4.5 megabits per second for $800 a month. Today, I have a gigabit access for $70 a month. That's a 200-fold increase in bandwidth at a tenth the cost. Wireless and cellular have also realized revolutionary advances. A second point is improved video coding technology, because not everyone has access to high-speed networks. When I started this, maybe a little bit after Alex did, but in the late 1990s at Polycom, we used H.263. That was the go-to codec for video calling. And today, modern video codecs AV1, DVC offer the same quality at about a 75% reduction in bitrate. Today, large group calls have become the norm. A decade ago, endpoints would encode their video. They'd send the video to a multi-point control unit, or MCU, which would decode, composite, and re-encode the video. Today, for the most part, endpoints encode multiple video streams like HD, VGA, QVGA resolutions at different bit rates, and selective forwarding units, SFUs, selectively forward these bit streams based on network capacity and endpoint capability. This SFU revolution, I'll call it, it eliminated the quality loss due to transcoding, and it has a tenth of the latency of MCUs at 100th the cost. It really was a revolution. The next item that I'd like to talk about is, or mention or highlight, encoding multiple bit streams requires more capable endpoints. So these SFUs push some of the coding that needed to, some of the CPU power onto the endpoints. But back then, at the beginning of the decade, the last decade, Moore's law was still alive and well. So we would count on these refreshes, and the endpoints got more and more capable every 9 months to a year, which was great. And something that I think we don't or at least I don't think about very often, but cameras now are everywhere. 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, that was not the case. So when we had a video conference, we'd have to plug in a USB peripheral to our laptop, and that almost always caused problems. That was one problem. But maybe more importantly, the social barrier of video. It was so common for people, I don't want to do video. I don't, people don't need to know what I look like. That is largely going away, certainly in the younger generations, like my kids, Gen Zs, don't even think twice about it. Lastly, WebRTC, which is the open source RTC for browsers and mobile apps, increase the availability of video conferencing applications and the quality of video calling. So thank you for bearing with me. I hope that I laid out at least some of the highlights of things. It really was all of these things combined. It wasn't any one or two things, in my opinion. So I'll pass it back to you.
I was just thinking as you were saying that I think one area that I would add to that is cloud infrastructure. That the wide availability of data centers for hosting these SFUs, and all the technology that has gone into that for rapidly deploying clusters of switching technology and orchestrating all that's really has been a story of the last 3 or 4 years to get that to a very highly capable, scalable point. And that enabled us to roll things out and increase services very rapidly over the pandemic period in a way that we couldn't have done before when it was just service providers doing this. And service providers themselves have adopted this scalable technology so that you can treat different parts of that infrastructure very similarly, and really create a new node in a new geographic area in a matter of a few hours, and provide a service to people to give them extra capacity when things are overloaded in that area.
Absolutely, yeah. I think people don't realize that it wasn't that long ago where to get 32 ports on a server, right, to do connections with just 32 people, you need a specialized box that look like a refrigerator and costs like $100,000, right? And now you can get a generic computer, right? No DSP, nothing, just, vanilla server. You go to your local store anywhere in the world and you can do, 100 ports, no questions asked. I mean, HD, okay? So that has been transformative, I think, and I completely agree that by converting that to a generic sort of computer, then all the cloud services that seem, evolved in parallel became available. So we just use them to scale this as much as we wanted. Yeah, absolutely.
I can add a bit about my experience in Facebook. So we have been investing in video calling for a few years now. So video calling was a major feature, is a major feature in messaging apps like WhatsApp, Messenger, Instagram for a few years now. So even before COVID-19, we saw this trend of people shifting from doing audio calls to do video calls. And we also started to see this trend of the need of group calls, not only for working scenarios, also for non-formal social scenario. So we already saw those trends and those features were already popular. It is just that COVID-19 really accelerated the process and really forced companies like Facebook to really increase the investment because the demand suddenly became so huge.
In fact, just on that note, Lital, maybe you guys are in organizations that are truly, just propelling the humanity forward in several different ways, right? We rely on your systems day in and day out. So I think everybody, including myself, would want to hear, how do you guys deal with that? I'm sure the demand has unprecedented, and the engineering challenges must have been just amazing. So I'm sure everybody is eager to hear, how do you guys do it? How do you guys manage to keep everything working all the time?
Specifically for COVID-19?
Yeah, during this era, because, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
so it was like crazy time back then, March 2020, because it was exactly also the time when all of us went to work from home, and suddenly, you know, all the dashboards are getting crazy. Everything, like, you don't know if it is real or something is broken. So we were tracking data very, very closely during March 2020 when the pandemic started. And very quickly, we started to see very interesting trends. So for example, we saw that group calls, which was a scenario that we were supporting, but relatively minor scenario, is just booming. So in a product like Messenger, before COVID-19, we were limiting a group call to be up to 8 people just because there was no need. Majority of group calls were 3-4 people. Relatively small scenario. And suddenly we started to see this error where the 9th participant is trying to join the group. So from data, it was very obvious that there is a need to enable large groups. Another very interesting trend that we saw, our focus was always mobile for those products, Messenger, WhatsApp. And suddenly with COVID-19, the usage from desktop really increased, desktop, web. So it was obvious that we need to shift and invest on that. And in general, we just saw the increase in usage. People started to use video calling for everything, for, you know, celebrate weddings, birthdays, funerals. So it was very obvious that we need to increase the capacity to support large groups, to really focus on large screens, and also to really invest in reliability and quality, because this is the time where people really relying on our products. So yeah, so that was really crazy time. A lot of things to do. It was really a challenge. I remember it just because all of us were working from home. We were like still trying to figure out how to work with our team from home, and so many new challenges at the same time.
I second that. Just an echo, complete mirror. I mean, exactly the same thing happened at Google. I was looking back just before this meeting at weekly minutes, and I was seeing a nice little trend up from late 2019 into early 2020, and then 2020 March, late February, early March, it just was almost not a function. It was just straight up weekly minutes went through the roof. Very quickly we achieved, and as of a couple of weeks ago, last time I checked, 45 times, not 45%, not 450%, 4,500% increase in weekly minutes that we saw. And just like you, scramble time. I got to make sure the quality's there, adding features like 49 by 40, 7 by 7, 49 tiles in meetings. That was just, who would ever need something like that? Well, COVID answered that question. A lot of people need that for a lot of different reasons. Anyway.
I would say that meeting scale exploded much faster than I ever conceived would be needed. You know, we used to think that 250 people in a meeting was a lot. No one ever would need more. We've had requests for 100,000 people in a meeting. That kind of scale is now routine, and there are companies that are aiming for 1 million people in a single meeting.
Yeah, I think everybody. Sorry. Yeah. So Michael just mentioned 45x. It's actually a bigger factor for us. So interestingly, so before the COVID, we've already had, I don't know how many people know WeChat. It's a very popular application in China. And through the WeChat and Tencent QQ and Tencent Cloud and other products, we've already been serving 1 billion monthly active users before the COVID. But more interestingly is on the Christmas Day of 2019, just right before the COVID, Tencent launched a product called Tencent Meeting, which is a Zoom-like application to provide video conferencing service. Of course, at that time, we had no idea what would happen next. In fact, COVID was already on the way to turn the world upside down. So at that time, we were just hoping that the number of daily active users could reach to 1 million soon. But then the COVID arrived, and within just a couple of months after this new product was officially launched, the number of DAU broke 10 million. And this is, of course, good news for the product, but it did put huge pressure on the backend computing resources to cater the rapid growth in demand. Since the late January of 2020, Tencent Cloud we were expanding the computing resource every day at the rate of about 15,000 cloud servers each day, adding a total of more than 100,000 cloud servers within 8 days. That's more than 1 million cores within a week. So I would say the prompt reaction at the beginning of the pandemic successfully supported the sudden increase in demand. And through the Tencent Meeting and Tencent Classroom and other Tencent products, the Tencent's real communication platform helped more than 1 billion students to take the classes remotely. And we also set a new daily record of 3 billion meeting minutes. So that's just how COVID affects everyone, and the number, the scale, and everything. It's just suddenly boosted up, and it's really a really an interesting year. Yeah.
I have a question from the audience about the education sector, and how much did the education sector add to the growth trend? I mean, do you guys have a sense?
Oh, it's a lot.
Yeah, it does that a lot, and particularly it added a lot with these large meetings. So you're having schools doing their classes, but also doing assemblies and having many more participants in a meeting. And then you also find that there are different uses of tools. There are different balance of things that people are using. Much more share rather than video in those meetings, and that kind of thing, and that puts different loads on different parts of your system. We were, I mean, in terms of the pandemic at Cisco, we found that it came in waves. In the Far East, you've got an initial wave, and we got these similar kinds of huge increases in back-end traffic, in particular. And I think that helped us prepare somewhat for a couple of months later in April, when it started hitting the rest of the world. And I would go back again to what I was saying earlier about all the cloud services aspects to this. One thing that we had to do very rapidly was streamline how we worked in the cloud and how we could increase capacity very rapidly and bring up new servers. I mean, first of all, we pillaged every server we could in the company to run our own data centers, but then we also needed to burst out into public cloud and to be able to do that very quickly. So we had to get very, very agile, and our DevOps teams were extremely overworked and had to scale up the amount of things they had to manage hugely. So everything had to get easier to manage very quickly too.
There's a related question, by the way, from the audience. How much manual tweaking, and load balancing was required versus running things fully automated? From what you said just now, Thomas, probably there was a lot of, at least initial hand-holding, right?
Yeah, I think so. But we also have to work with service providers. So we set up these dedicated bridges with all our service providers that were 24/7. So we were constantly managing what they were doing as well. But you could kind of see, as the Earth rotates, there's this huge load that's coming across all the geographies, like an enormous wave, and so you have to adjust to that. And it's still, and when numbers are very large, then the variation in those numbers is very large as well, and that's a big challenge too.
So I can share that in our case, it was really unclear what is the volume that is coming, because everything went so crazy. So some knobs were added to the system to be able to scale down quality of video, for example, if we are seeing that we are reaching to the capacity of our services. So we add those knobs for number of participants, for video quality, just to ensure that we will be able to deal with the demand.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just looking for another question that came in. We can address it later. Okay. By the way, just because people might be asking, we asked Zoom to participate as well, but they did not provide anybody to join us. And I think I want to mention that because this is one of the companies that basically became very well known in the public's mind in terms of video conferencing, right? I think the company became synonymous with video communication during the COVID era. Okay, now I guess in the old days everybody was trying to explain to people when you wanted them to join a video call how to find a camera, how to find a speakerphone. Now pretty much everybody has that on the desk. They know how to use it, so that's great. Okay, so now I think, in fact, we're probably a little bit overwhelmed and fatigued, maybe even, by this constant sort of barrage of video calls. I certainly have, and I've been in this for many years. Okay, I guess one question is, what are the challenges that remain in this? In other words, we have these very reliable now pipes, and in fact, I think there was a question also with regards to reliability versus but let's leave it out when we discuss codecs. So we now have excellent big pipes. We can send video and audio, right? But when we connect, we are actually conducting meetings to achieve certain goals, right? There might be a list of action items. We need to resolve the matter. We might be reviewing a legal document. So our ability to see and hear each other, of course, for a social setting, it has value in its own right? But in a business setting, oftentimes there is another set of goals that essentially have to come along. So I wanted to ask you guys, where are we with that? In other words, and I like to use the parallel of Excel versus something like Quicken. You can manage your personal finances with Excel, no problem with that, right? But if you use Quicken, everything is modeled properly, and then all the actions you need to do, it's just one click away to reconcile, let's say, your credit card statement with your expenses. And, for those that are not in the US and may not know the software. So the point being that the software is there to help us, get things done very quickly, right? So the question is the current, set of video communication tools at that level of capability, meaning allow us to get work done just by a couple of clicks? Maybe Thomas, you want to?
Yeah,
Bernard.
I guess there's a couple of aspects. Because there are different things you're trying to achieve. So one aspect is this integration of tools that you're talking about. So we have AI assistants that we're developing to do that kind of thing at Cisco, the WebEx assistant. You can take transcription, you can even do translation, and you can try to extract some notes automatically from meetings. And so there are those kind of office integrations that I think are growing more and more, where you're trying to take the workload off running a meeting. But the other thing I think is around about participation in a workspace. So as people start going back to work, we're going to have a more and more hybrid environment with people in offices and people at home. And it always was a barrier to video communication that remote participants were second-class participants. So how can we move on from that and have more casual kind of interactions for remote participants, make them feel more included? Can we all live in a virtual space together somehow? And these are much more open-ended and more difficult things than integrating more tools and more kinds of documents and editing and those kinds of things.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So yeah, I just want to add that creating the feeling that the team is in the same space, sharing the same space, although part of the team is working remotely. I think this is the next phase here. So the way I'm thinking about the world post COVID-19, probably lots of the workplaces will remain in this hybrid mode where some of the people are coming back to the office, some of the people will continue to work remotely. So creating this virtual shared space, instead of talking with a grid of people in the video call as we are doing right now, really providing the feeling that we are sharing together a space. I think this is the next big challenge, both for audio with special audio, and both with video with potential integration with virtual reality devices and avatars and 3D construction of video. So people will get a feeling that they're really collaborating and working together.
Yeah. There's been this traditional division between real-time communications and streaming. And I think the pandemic has dissolved the barriers between these two things. So what we're seeing is a demand for highly produced real-time experiences at very large scale. So there's no longer a choice between low latency, low scale, and high latency, high scale. People want both, and they want to be able to produce an entire experience. So we've seen a lot of use cases which merge streaming and RTC. We at Microsoft, we did something called Together Mode. It was used in production of sporting events, and we're seeing enormous demand for that kind of thing. We are taking streaming inputs, compositing them using machine learning, and creating a new kind of experience that's both real-time and streaming simultaneously. And one of the interesting things about that is it actually challenges a lot of the foundations that we've seen in RTC, like the RTP as a transport. Many new services are not using RTP. They're using custom transports that allow for both low latency and high scale. So as an example, we're seeing a lot of new services built on the WebRTC data channel. They're not using the WebRTC for audio video. They're transporting it in a custom way, using existing the data channel modes. We're seeing very, very different architectures emerge, and I would say that the new services are neither RTC nor streaming, but a hybrid of both.
Mm. Yeah, I think one of the aspects, I guess, for me, I mean, first of all, even this conference, by the way, right, using this new set of tools, for me, it was the first time actually that I attended a conference using this format. And I have to say, it has its benefits. For sure, right? I was able to see, some sessions that I could not, from a time point of view. At the time they were broadcast, I saw them on demand later on. Fantastic, right? And so it definitely has its benefits. Of course, on the other hand, it does have weaknesses in terms of lack of engagement. In fact, I was a professor for many, many years, right? And a big part of communicating with somebody, it requires a physical presence. Why? Because you need to feel where the audience is at the time where you're speaking. So it's like a performance, right? I'm not just sitting there reciting my speech or reciting the lesson that I have to give to you today, right? This is supposed to be an interactive sort of session. In fact, even this session here, I wish it was live and we could interact with the audience as well, right? Because it will make it much more dynamic. So especially when you're alone, at least here I can see all of you, right? If I was alone facing 300 students, right, it would be very awkward to just sit here, watch my screen, and maybe I would see faces, right? But you just don't get that physical response. And I think also as human beings, we have been designed, like evolved, I should say, not designed, evolved. So to actually to capture that, right, to react to that, right? So for me, one of the most frustrating, I guess, aspects of this is the lack of this connection, right? Which again, in some cases is necessary, and usually in some others is nice to have, but not absolutely necessary. Maybe in a quick half-hour meeting, business meeting, maybe that's not a big deal because it's mostly information exchange, right? I need ABC, I can give you DEF. Okay, thank you very much. Bye. Right? It's not the same if you're teaching somebody and there is a different level of connection that you're trying to accomplish. Anyway, that's just my personal, I guess, experience. I don't know about you guys. I guess nobody has been at the office for a long time. I think all of you are remote, right? Is that correct? Is that a fair statement or not?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, yes, yeah. So what has been your experience in your daily lives? I mean, with this?
Well, for me, there's actually been almost no change, because my team has been remote and distributed across the world for 10 years. So I've kind of been working like this. You know, would go into the office and I would interact with people there, but I guess what I miss is from the office is those kind of accidental conversations in the corridor, bumping into people and so on, and so you don't get any unplanned interaction when you're fully remote. And I think that's something that we really want to fix if we want to have, you know, distributed workplaces, you know, really working well for people who are not going to the office.
I can share also from my experience. So as I was sharing, Facebook significantly increased the investment in video calling, which means the team was growing a lot in the last year and a half. At this point, the majority of my team never saw each other, never met each other. They joined Facebook or they joined the team while we are working remotely. So yeah, I guess there are like several points. So, but one thing that I completely agree. So many things that in the past we could solve just by walking to the desk of someone and having this non-formal quick chat. Now we need to schedule this formal meeting in order to figure out this this topic. So it adds a lot of like overhead on those scheduled meetings. So the calendar is now really full with formal meetings. So I personally really miss the non-formal interaction, non-formal moments when people are brainstorming about a problem together. And now everything became very, very formal. Another thing that I noticed, because of this lack of bonding, there is this lack of bonding in the office. Sometimes small conflicts that could have been solved by, you know, having a non-formal lunch together. Now we need to do this meeting to figure this out. So yeah, so this is, I guess, the negative side of us all working remotely, and something that we still didn't solve well.
Right, so I would also like to share some of my experience. Same as Thomas, my team is scattered around the world, so partly I'm quite used to this way, working remotely with my colleagues. But I also have half of the team located local in US, and same as what Lita said, and we also have new employees joining us during this pandemic. We've never met each other. This is a little bit challenging, but to cope with that, we did have some online social team building activities, and it's not ideal, but we buy the same lunch, the pizza delivered, same pizza delivered to employees' houses, and then eat in front of the cameras, and but that also back to the previous conversation, all those conferencing meeting applications, the backbone technology is one thing, but on top of that, we need a lot of functionalities to make it interesting. When we do the online team building, we need things like voting, and then well, chatting box is always there. And I think in the Tencent meeting, we had this red packet distribution function embedded, so it just all make things more interesting. And also we have the auto translation, because our team, we have people speaking Mandarin Chinese, people speaking English, people speaking French, and that also helps. And also what Alex said, the emotional part, I think that's something we should look into in the future.
Others?
Well, I'll chime in. I like Thomas and others that have discussed work. I work very remotely. My team is in Stockholm, Sweden, and I work out of Austin, Texas. So I'm used to doing that. But what I do, and what I've been doing for a decade and a half when I work remotely, is I like to augment the working remotely with visits, regular visits, maybe several times a year. Spend a week at the remote facility. And I have gone on these visits with no agenda, and I come back with pages and pages of to-dos, because you bump into people, you have unexpected interactions. I remember a long time ago, probably around 2000, 2001, there have been companies like Polycom, where I was working, that Disney a customer wanted to facilitate this informal bumping into each other, and they created video walls where you'd have these large screens, which back then was really novel. Now you can do this for almost no money. They built a hallway with 3 monitors, and if you wanted to brainstorm or just you just go to the end of don't schedule anything, you just walk to the end, and you could see someone in Japan or California or wherever, it would be other monitors. And that was supposed to simulate at some level this kind of, oh, hey, I wasn't gonna, I was just thinking of something, and I wouldn't have contacted you, but since you're here, let's talk about this. That type of technology would be terrific to have, maybe not so contrived as a video wall, but something.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. There's a question about I guess, what are the lessons learned in this COVID pandemic, in the video community, but I think I will leave that to the end. Maybe we can close with that, actually. That might be an interesting sort of way to finish it up. But what I would like to do is bring it back a little back on the technical side. I mean, this panel is discussing real-time communications video, okay? And the sad fact is that this is a very, 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 very small part of global video, right? In the sense that the majority of video is entertainment video, okay? Streaming video, okay? And I say sad just because, oftentimes the needs of our application are not catered by, let's say, chip manufacturers, right? Who typically want to just be able to play back, streaming video, right? So the level of dynamic interaction that might be necessary for real time, right, might not be available, at least in the past, it was not available in silicon, right? And you had to resort in software implementations, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one item I wanted to ask you if you see that now changing. I guess Bernard alluded to the fact that these two worlds are essentially, merging. But there are practical things that have to happen as well, right? From a hardware and a software point of view for this to happen. And the second thing which relates to that in my mind is system level work. Looking at the PCS, right? Most of the work in this, in this conference has to do with the compression alone, right? I think all of us here in this group know very well that compression alone does not solve the problem. Why? Because of the very heavy interaction of the network, right? And all these different aspects, the computing device that is running the system, right? All these things have to be looked at in their totality, and the design has to basically balance everything together. That's how, I guess, we came up with solutions like this, if you, et cetera, exactly because we looked at the bigger picture. It's very common in academic conferences and academic work to focus on isolated problems because, of course, that's the best way to make progress. You can measure it. You can measure the advance. But I would hope and expect and hope that within companies as well as universities, people still work on these system level issues. So I wanted to ask, what is your take vis-a-vis real-time communications video within your companies and sort of the quest to have more support, right? In the hardware that's being distributed around in the services and systems that are built to do video. Do you see a change now, or are we the same we were like 5 years ago?
So let me try to let me chime in. Definitely it's a system level work, and people working on video compression, I think we all know that compression by itself doesn't optimize the end-to-end experience. It has to be optimized together with networking strategies and a lot of other things. And also talking about hardware, when we choose what to encode and what to send, and we need to be aware what hardware support is available, and we would like to use the format which is supported by the hardware. And for example, if the other ends, the mobile device can only decode 264, then we send 264. So it is definitely a whole, all the pieces that have to be considered together. And in terms of the real world products, it's not only the compression performance, we also need to look at the power consumption and the CPU usage, GPU usage, and you don't want to turn on the video conferencing application, which kills all other things. So it is, there are a lot of practical issues, as Stefan right, it's not just a BD rate.
I can also add that, so for video calling, I would say, especially on mobile devices, there is this trade-off between the quality of the video and performance. So this is a balance between battery consumption and CPU usage, and also we don't want the device to start to melt in people's hands because now they need to decode 8 video streams. So there is this trade-off. So we will, I would say, in many cases, we will prefer to use hardware solutions in order to save on performance. But also, in many cases, the hardware solution is not optimized for the low latency scenario for real-time communication. So this is the challenge. And I think now as this the video calling scenario becomes more and more common, so the, hardware is supporting, we see it in more like new devices, there is better and better support for the low latency scenario.
Okay, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Michael, you want to say something?
Oh, I don't know if I should, but I'm not as optimistic as what I'm hearing in discussions with some of the larger hardware manufacturers. There does seem to be some reticence, at least what I've heard and seen, toward really focusing on the low latency. And I don't understand why. My guess is that hardware comes after, and COVID is a new phenomena. So maybe my optimistic self says, just wait a little bit, and it will come. It will come.
Okay.
So
well,
I mean, on the hardware front, there is
streaming influence the overall hardware architecture, Michael, because it's such a huge part of the demand on mobile devices, right? So essentially, it's really what you're seeing is an economic skewing there. But I would also say the devices themselves, as software architects, it's our responsibility to make best use of the hardware that we have. And in many cases, you have to be really cognizant of how the GPU can be used, for example, to avoid memory copies. And especially now that machine learning is an integral part of all these real-time stacks, it's not just taking stuff and encoding it and shipping it out. It's potentially an enormous amount of machine learning processing, which has to be done efficiently.
And I agree with you 100% on everything you just said, but streaming is the big ecosystem, but let's talk about video encoding, not decoding. Let's separate those ideas. Decoding, for sure, consumer entertainment video is the king, but encoding, who's doing that? I mean, it's real time, especially after COVID. It's us. It's the real time community, because we're doing it from our phones and our laptops. It's the encoder I really want to see get the hardware manufacturers really improve. Decoding, I can do relatively small resolutions, maybe VGA on a lot of different devices. Decoding is relatively lightweight compared with encoding, but boy, it would be great to have real-time primary front focus design criteria for video encoding with this low latency, and error resilience is another thing that we haven't mentioned. Really important, multiple temporal layering and such things.
There is a controversial, I guess, question from Yannis Katsavounidis, who asks, he says, look, bandwidth, availability and cost go by 200x. You guys are working very, 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 very hard to improve video recording efficiency, like every 7 years by, let's say, 50% at every generation. So what's the big deal? Just stick with one standard maybe, and just allow the communication infrastructure to scale up, and we're done, right? Or invest more on that rather than new chips, new coding chips, etc. So what do we answer to Yannis?
Well, I think a couple of points. I mean, one is the world is bigger than, West, the Western developed economies, right? And lots of people in the world, billions of people, do not have a lot of network bandwidth. The second thing is, I see, even with the codecs we have, we're still not in a situation that I would call, no pixel left behind, right? If you want to share the full resolution of your camera and the full resolution of your desktop, and you can, and do that without any errors, you can't do that at the moment. On most networks, either there's bandwidth limitations or there's CPU limitations, or both.
And I'd like to, so I looked up for mobile bandwidth. I want to focus on mobile for a second, because that's at some level the weak link. 10% of mobile calls, and I'm looking at hundreds of millions of calls in our Google tools. 10% of mobile calls in the United States have video bandwidth available for video coding at under 100 kilobits per second. 25% in Indonesia and almost 30% in India. So, if you want to get any meaningful video out at less than 100 kilobits per second, you got to have a good codec. And that really comes down to it. That's just availability. Then there's, there's accessibility is not just, do you have the bandwidth, but can you pay for it? Video calling is really too expensive for a huge number of people in the world. My daughter happens to be in Uganda right now, and she is paying $2 per gigabyte for data, which is, I mean, we just probably all of us say, oh, that's great. And it is great at some level, but when the typical salary is $7,000 a year, and 2 gigabytes is, I don't know, a couple of hours of video calling, and that's assuming you do nothing else with your data, which of course is not a good assumption. It's just out of reach. So that's my answer, to be honest.
Any other takers? It's a very good answer, by the way, and we always forget that, right? Because we're so used to what we see around us every day. But it's it's a big planet. There's a lot of people around with very different communication systems, okay, and devices. Okay, not everybody has the latest, iPhone 5G, whatever, device. And now, speaking of codecs, there was an excellent, session by Sean on machine learning, coding, etc. And I find it fascinating. I remember, again, I'm old enough to remember a discussion and competition between wavelets and DCT. Okay, those who are interested in paleontology can actually look that one up. So it was a very exciting era, because there was a lot of people who tried an alternative way to compress, right, and produced a lot of work. In the end, it didn't manage to compete with DCT for many reasons. This is not the time to create this new, relive this this war. But there is an assumption that the traditional architectures of video codecs will prevail. That you have JVT working, 200, 300 people around the world, always improving that fundamental architecture. So it's very difficult for something, fundamental new to come in and become competitive, right? Because it hasn't been optimized for many, many years. So where do you see things going? I mean, going forward, obviously, there is a lot of things going on with AV1, with 266, right? I don't want to discuss all the different details between those two codecs, but there is evolution in multiple fronts. There is a royalty, bearing, royalty-free discussions, which again, that's maybe we shouldn't just go on that era. But from a technology point of view, right, both let's say directions, royalty-free and royalty-bearing, more or less, on similar grounds. Machine learning comes in and offers a completely different, way to look at things. So where do we stand on that? Do you think there is any chance that it might sort of slowly start getting into more commercial and more sort of generally available systems, or is it still going to be academic? Maybe Sean, you want to chime in?
Oh, yeah. So machine learning. Well, machine learning has definitely demonstrated its effectiveness in solving a lot of computer vision and image processing problem. problems, and so a lot of people are encouraged to investigate using machine learning for video coding. So a lot of so like AO Media and JVED, JPEG, and there are a lot of people and also standard activities ongoing in exploration of machine learning technologies for video coding nowadays, and we have seen some promising results. And generally speaking, if we look at, say, using machine learning for video coding, we could see two trends. One is we call it a hybrid solution, in which that you use machine learning technologies to replace some modules like the intro prediction or in-loop filters and then on top of the traditional conventional block video coding architecture. And the other is the autoencoder solution. What we see nowadays is the autoencoder approach is still at quite early stage, while the hybrid approach seems to have some progress. But having said that, with the progress and encouraging results in terms of compression, but the complexity it remains a challenge for learning-based methods. We see that the decoding runtime, for example, of learning-based methods is usually 10 to 100 times slower than the conventional methods, and also the memory size, especially the memory size desired or consumed by the networks, is far beyond what current hardware implementation can afford. Especially the complexity challenge is critical for real-time applications when they run on the mobile devices. So given what was said, personally, I don't think machine learning-based video coding would appear in real-time applications or products very soon. However, given some time, we hope that the complexity issue can be resolved, and or there would be some new hardware technologies or designs that could cope with the learning-based video coding technology. But don't forget that we have some learning-based pre and post-processing technologies, such as super resolution and frame rate up conversion, and those have already been implemented into products. And they're not video coding exactly, but they help saving bandwidth and increasing the compression quality. That's my thoughts about learning-based things in this.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, it doesn't have to be in the codec, it can be surrounding the codec, and it's actually being used already. And in fact, there is silicon today that can do machine learning, right, even on mobile devices. So I guess as this keeps growing, right, more and more of the processing could actually land on that silicon and accelerate things. So I was personally surprised to see how fast this is going with Apple devices and so on, right? I don't know, Michael, maybe you other. Yeah, go ahead, Vitaly, you want to say something?
I'm saying that I think, again, till we will have meaningful hardware support, it will be a challenging trade-off between quality and performance, binary size, CPU usage, especially on mobile devices. When we are talking about video calls, we need to think about mobile devices. This is a very challenging trade-off.
Michael, on AV2, do you think this again? I guess we shouldn't discuss details about codec plans. I mean, Jill Boyce, I think, had a very nice presentation about the status of codecs. But any work on AV2 for real time that you are seeing as happening or not? If not, it's too early to tell.
I'm embarrassed to say I have a calendar meeting every week, and I always have something come up. I have not been tracking that, and I feel terrible about it because I feel guilty, but also because it's such a great opportunity to learn and keep up with things that are happening. So I do not have an answer for you. That's a long way of saying I don't know.
That's perfectly fine.
So,
okay.
Maybe I can chime in
about
the AV2 part because I am actually participating. Okay. So AV2 is now under the phase 1 development, and it has an ambitious goal of finalizing the standard in 2023. And it's currently it's in the phase 1, so it's mainly focused on the compression part. But I think the team is the whole group is fully aware of the you know, the practical challenges and complexity issues. And when we are evaluating the tools, we always keep the complexity in mind. And I think the goal of the group is to have AV2 utilized in all sorts of products, including low delay, low latency applications in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have 4 minutes left, so I'm cognizant of the time. I think I addressed most of the questions that I think that we should from the that are coming in online. And there's one which I think it would be nice if it is a parting sort of statement from the panel, which is, you know, in your opinion, what were the main lessons learned by the video calling community during the pandemic?
So I would say, sorry.
Go ahead.
I would say one thing we learned is we realized is that video technologies are important, very important, super important, and that's very encouraging for people working in this domain. So I think that really encouraged in a lot of dimensions, the technology, the video coding, the transport technologies, protocols, and especially putting everything together. Like at the beginning of the pandemic, and everything suddenly just go boom, and how we react promptly and utilizing the mature technologies in our head and then put them together and make things work.
Yep, I got that.
I think on the compression technology specifically, I think low complexity software encoders really matter. We need to devise standards that can still be done real time in software, because hardware takes years to arrive, that we can get maybe not the best quality video, but good quality video at lower bit rates than we could before without too much increase in complexity. So machine learning and so on is great. But we still need to be able to do it, not just assuming that there are GPUs available.
Yeah, perfectly valid point, yes.
And I've learned, oh, go ahead.
I just want to say that video calling is not going anywhere. It is not something that the world needed for COVID-19. We see all numbers, everything remaining very high. It opens a lot of opportunities for people all around the world. So I think exciting times are still ahead of us.
And I wanted to things that I learned. So I've been part of the scalable video infrastructure cloud type or pre-cloud type thinking and architecture for Alex, I don't know, when did we work together at Video? For a long, long time. And COVID-19 was a smoke test. It works. It works at scale. I mean, wow. We thought it would, we believed it would, but you never know till it happens. So that's one of my takeaways. And then I want to echo something that Sean said. I've been doing this for a long time, and my wife, almost a year ago now, said, you know, you've been doing video conferencing for a long time, and I've always thought it, and she didn't use the word frivolous, but unimportant. And she just very seriously said, you know, what you do is really important. This is very important to society. And the fact that COVID-19, a terrible thing, had to happen for that realization and for us to get super busy and do things that we knew was possible or thought was possible, but is possible to bring the world together, even though we can't be together, is really terrific.
Bernard?
Well, I think the lesson I learned was that the market for video is much larger than we thought. It's not just virtual conferencing, it's virtual, potentially virtual everything. And we should keep that in mind. And there is an enormous demand for both high scale and low latency. And that's, I think, we're the holy grail at this point.
Okay, fair enough. And so I guess it's my turn. And the lesson I learned, I guess I was reminded of, is, you know, I've been working very closely with some of you over the years. So what I was reminded of is how nice it has been to work live with you. So I guess I truly hope that, you know, we'll soon be able to hang out together again and see each other and spend more time together. okay? Because, you know, I enjoy the video, but, you know, the live presence is definitely much more enjoyable. Okay, I think we are out of time. Thank you all so very much. It has been wonderful. I hope the audience enjoyed it. Until next time, I guess.